Hey guys, so today I decided to get into the topic of the masculine woman, which I see a lot of people arguing about and going into considering the damaged woman and how toxic masculine energy kind of seeps into her personality, all that good stuff. And I was reading an article by Michael Lepage, I'm not sure how to actually pronounce his name, from newscientist.com that went over the evolutionary adaptation of blue wrasse fish that related pretty heavily to this subject. So I wanted to just dive into it and give a little more detail on the origins of how this problem arises and some helpful remedies to it. The introduction that I wrote for this was that the masculine woman is essentially an innocent woman covered by a protective man, but they're both taking place within the psyche of that woman. A masculine woman is actually the sweetest, most tender woman you'll ever meet. She's just become her own father, standing at the door with a shotgun. The degree to which she plays out her masculine role is equal to the feminine gem lying underneath that facade. The masculine woman is the woman who morphed to save the species, like the bluehead wrasse fish, among hundreds of others. So when I read this article, it went through exactly how the females, when the males are taken out of the population, how the females take about 20 days or so to morph into a male, just a select few, obviously not the entire population. But the article on newscientist.com was playing into the adaptation of fish to be able to change genders in order to keep their species running, which I've talked about very briefly in other videos, but I've never actually broken down how that process takes place and how we see that happening in women who have had fathers that were either abusive or absent or whatever the case may be. But this article describes that process within fish pretty well, and we see those same parallels taking place within our women who have been abandoned. And I think it helps us understand the idea of the masculine woman better and gives us more of an insight into how those women can heal and the proper way they should really be looked at to begin with, as far as their value and not necessarily just being considered a nuisance to the dating market. I wrote down a few key phrases from the article that I read, just to break this down a little bit more. Her colleagues removed some male bluehead wrasse. This triggers females to change sex. They found that the loss of the males makes some females stressed. They become more aggressive and start performing male courtship behaviors. The genes associated with female hormones shut down. Colors begin to change. Around 500 species of fish can change sex. It is most common for female fish to turn into males. And I wrote that down because I'm a big advocate of the father and the male being the king or the root of the family. I am a little bit more traditionalist, believe it or not, in my ideology, but scientifically this also makes sense that the male precedes the female, and it's not an argument of who's better than the other, which one. They're both equal. I've talked about this stuff before, and the first question people always want to say, well, does that mean you think that males as leaders are above women? And I don't believe that at all. But I believe this is mirrored in tons of species of fish because we function the same way, that it's more common for the female fish or female humans to morph into males energetically because of the fall or the absence of male fish first. So you typically don't see that happen the other way. I've also researched this in other animals as well, but typically it's a female assuming the role of the other gender in the species in order to compensate for the loss of something. And I think we see that happening all the time with masculine women, and yet we persecute them for this behavior, and yet it's an evolutionary adaptation for survival that many species exhibit. So we're essentially the same as the science experiment going on in this article, just breaking down some of these phrases. The behaviors mirrored in women who experience trauma or the absence of their fathers, right? So in the experiment, the colleagues purposely remove the males, and in society we see that in the form of fathers abandoning the home, adverse childhood experiences like parents having substance abuse problems with abuse and emotional neglect, all that. So all of the ACEs, there are about 10, I believe, if you want to look up what adverse childhood experiences are. So in reference to women, what happens is the root of the tree gets attacked first, and the women end up having to assume responsibility in order to keep the family going or keep their children going, or, you know, just even self-preservation. You know, you don't even have to necessarily have other people depending on you, but just to even save yourself in a masculinized society, or to be able to fend for yourself, you're going to have to presume some masculine qualities just for the sake of, you know, it's a survival instinct. This triggers females to change sex. They found that the loss of the males makes the females stressed. They become more aggressive and start performing male courtship behaviors. I wrote that phrase down because it plays into our dating market pretty heavily. I've also, everybody knows this at this point, but I've worked in a club for a long time, and we kind of see the opposite, especially in strip club environments. It looks like men leading, like on the surface, it looks like men leading and buying women's attention, and it seems like a leadership thing happening. But what is actually taking place in clubs and strip clubs, as well as just the general dating market today, but relating it to clubs specifically, the women are actually pursuing the men and not the other way around. So when you dig a little deeper, what's actually happening in strip clubs particularly is the women are pursuing and coming up to the men. The women are attempting to entice the men or do a colorful dance like many birds in our ecosystem do, right? Normally it's the males that make a spectacle of themselves in the animal kingdom in order to impress the female. And we kind of see the opposite going on now. So even outside of the club, we see this on social media with women over-sexualizing themselves and essentially making their sexual self their entire self, and really pushing, I would say, the importance. I don't think it's something that should be eradicated completely, and I've talked about this in other videos, but we see women really stressing their sexuality as that colorful spectacle dance that males in the animal kingdom typically do to impress the female, but now we're doing it to impress men and to garner the attention of men. So that is actually a male courtship behavior and not a female courtship behavior, even though it looks like on the surface that you're using your sensuality to impress a man. I don't think all women are doing this, by the way, but I think it's something that has been psychologically conditioned into us. So even if you're not doing it on purpose, one of the things I've talked about in another video is going through the content on your media and asking yourself if it's over 50%, or I would say 75%, 80%. If it's definitely up there in the 90% where it's nothing but your looks, you may want to take a step back and ask yourself if you put the same amount of importance and value on other aspects of yourself, or if you're relying on just your physicality and your sexuality to the world at large, not even just in the dating market, but when it comes to your value. Do you place your value higher above other females because you think you look better than them? Things like that. So that toxicity can bleed into other areas besides the dating market and to both genders. But the courtship behavior, I think it's important to go through your media and see, sorry, my battery was dying, and see if the majority of it is showcasing your looks as opposed to other things. And I think you should do both. As a woman, I tell people this all the time, you should do both because you are a sensual being. But if you're realizing that you're heavily focused on that, as feminine as it seems to display a female body, maybe ask yourself if that is one of the male courtship behaviors you're exhibiting. And I think on the men's side of this, you know, you can scroll through your feed and you can see who you follow. If you're scrolling through your feed and it's giving you that feedback loop, right? Because Instagram's going to give you more of what you already look at. You know, it's going to multiply that. So whatever you like, whatever you respond to, whatever you comment, it's part of the algorithm, right? It just feeds you more of that. So if you go through that algorithm on your feed and see that the majority of it is you being impressed by the female form and maybe quotes or memes concerning sexuality, you know, like see if that's the filter that's hitting your eyes most of the time. And I think the majority of us will be able to admit that that's a lot of what pops up on our feed. It's a lot of what we pay attention to and what we like. So I think it expresses a deeper symptom as a society that we are masculinizing and approving the masculinization of women, because this spectacle that we make of ourselves to impress males is not a female behavior. That is a male behavior. That is covertly pursuing the man. You're not doing it by words, you're not doing it by direct contact, but you are throwing your net out there first to catch the male's attention so he will come to you. So it's you fishing, it's not the man fishing. We also see this in the provider role. Not that women cannot be their own providers or should not be their own providers. I believe every human as a sovereign individual should be stable in every way, including financial. But if you're a workaholic, which we see a lot of now, I was a culprit of that for a while. If you're trying to constantly compete with men or outdo a man with underlying aggression, rather than passion. I think some people's energies are different, but I think we see a lot of, especially in the feminist movement, right? A lot of these behaviors don't come from the desire to do it, which I would fully advocate for if that were the case. But we see another male courtship behavior of trying to bring finances to the table or trying to impress or outdo somebody with finances, which is a competitive yang energy. And if that's overtaking a lot of your personality or what you, again, feel you have to contribute, because these are all root chakra things and these are all basic homeostasis things, right? So sex and finances and being able to provide stability all happen on the lowest level of our existence. And the root chakra is supposed to be manned by the leader or by the male, right? So as a female, if you're trying to use status or use basic stability and financial provision as an ego booster or a competitive edge against a man or above other women, that is also a very masculine trait that comes from, again, having to be your own provider or be your own protector a lot of the time. I don't bash women for this. I think another area I'm going to talk about in the video is that this is actually very honorable for us to have done. And I think society does a really bad job of dishonoring women for having been put in this mentality and put into this position. So towards the end of the video, I'm going to correct that. But for now, let's talk about some of the issues. Female aggression, right? So they become stressed, they become aggressive, all that good stuff. Same thing that happens with the blue wrasse fish. Also, the competition for limited spaces with alpha males. Both of these are aggression based and not something that is innate to the yin female energy. We see this with women sharing men. So not even just competing for the man's attention, not even just being okay being the main chick or the side chick, which both of those, I think you're a sitting duck either way. You should not settle for either one of those. And you should not view being the main chick as any sort of accomplishment whatsoever. But women are willing to settle for these positions because we don't have as many male providers, both in mindset and finances, the way that we used to. So the other masculine behavior is to settle for a lesser position, not being the only woman, and then being aggressive with the other women and competitive with the other women who are fighting for a spot with who you believe to be your man. And we've seen this with cheating, right? Men getting caught and then women physically getting into fist fights. That's not a soft, nurturing energy whatsoever. That's very that's very yang energy, and that's happening because women are angry about the lack of fidelity of men, which we're conditioning into them, right? As masculine women, not giving that role of masculinity and let me prove myself to you, to the man. So we've already conditioned a man to believe that we will compete for them and that we will share them. So we're putting into men's brains at large, damaged men who also need healing, just like our gender, that it's okay to be competed for, to be courted, and putting them into their yin energy of I have many suitors. I don't have to pick one. So that's something that we do as women that is also a masculine trait as a result of this. Let me go through my little notes for a second. So again, addressing the social media issue, I think women are over-sexualizing themselves in competition with other women as well. I think we see many good girls get into this habit because we already see a train of thought leading that way. Everything's saturated with over-sexuality, both on and off of social media. And then we condition ourselves as women again to, well, I have to be better. I have to look better than that woman. I have to wear less clothes than that woman. She's getting all of these likes. The guy I like is liking her photo, and she's in a bikini, so I should post a photo in a bikini. It can start very benign, you know, but we are psychologically conditioning each other to compete for men in this way as well. And it turns into that weird woman on woman hate that we see today. I truly believe that jealousy might not necessarily be eradicated, but jealousy and anger associated with it would not be as prevalent if fidelity and male providers and women staying in their feminine and having their own courtship was more readily available than what we see today. I think the fact that we are trying to fight over men and the limited resources of alpha male providers, it's leading to this weird cycle of hating each other for things that ultimately fall on a healing man's deficiency. And this is not to knock either gender, okay? We live in an utterly broken world that needs a lot of help on both ends. But we're assuming this role of hate and aggression within each other and weird competitiveness within each other that shouldn't necessarily be there, because there's just, it's the lack of resources, it's survival mentality. Last phrase that I found to be really interesting, which we can also see exhibited in humans as well, they said that the genes within the female hormones shut down, and the physical colors of the blue wrasse fish in the article will change as well. The males and females are two different colors. We also see genetic differences in women and hormonal differences in women. The aggression and the stress and the competitiveness that results from these sort of dynamics increase your cortisol levels. You have higher levels of testosterone when you're angry or when you work out too much. Things like that, or even in prepubescent girls, right? When you're going through puberty and you do a lot of sports, you might not necessarily eradicate the balance entirely, but women will have lower levels of estrogen and higher levels of testosterone during puberty. So they're also a lot less likely to develop breast tissue and have a lower amount of body fat, because testosterone produces muscle, and estrogen, it makes women essentially store more fat in their bodies, which is normal. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But in relation to how this changes our genes, right? If we can see this during puberty, this also still happens to you in adulthood when you start assuming these masculine behaviors. Your levels of cortisol go up tremendously. You're probably going to store more belly fat because of this. So you can also look at your body and see if that's an indicator right around the lower belly and your, like the little chichos, right? That's stress from society in general, but I think that women specifically, if you're storing more in that area and you're a workaholic, that can be heavily related, especially if you're not getting enough sleep. Also with the higher levels of testosterone resulting from aggression, there's been a lot of surveys and studies that actually show this, that women today are not producing as many female hormones and are producing more male-oriented hormones, and stress levels also increase your adrenaline as well when you're in all of these weird, traumatic, sticky situations that we've all been in. So on a whole, this can affect both genders, but once women grow further and further into these tendencies, you'll see essentially, I would say stress hormones first and foremost, and then testosterone and epinephrine spike in the system in a way that we're not naturally balanced to be. This can happen in men as well, but today my video is focused on women. Everything about the article aside, the positive side to this that I want to address is women's ability to actually do this. It's really cool to me. It's damaging when you do it long term. This is a contingency plan, but I find it to be very honorable that women are capable of even doing these sorts of things to keep the population going when our male leaders fall short. And I'm gonna get into that in a minute. A few pages that I wrote concerning this, all of that evidence and all of those parallels pointed out, I think we have a really bad habit of only addressing the issues, only addressing the wrongdoings and the trauma in almost this persecuting way, which we need. We need to be on our own asses all the time to point out our evils or our shortcomings or the blind spots that we can't see in ourselves that the outer environment can see. But I don't really see enough balance on the opposite end. So again, it's that yin yang energy. We do lots of go forward, heal, get yourself right, fix your life. It's messed up. You know, we have a lot of that yang energy that's very action based and discipline and hey, go fix yourself. But we don't soften up sometimes to that yin energy and really remind both men and women, but in this video, women, that it's very honorable what you've done, and it's very honorable that you've been able to accomplish this in portions of your life. One thing that I wrote down when I wrote this was talking about kind of the Hunger Games situation or the Colosseum. It's like placing somebody in an arena with a hungry lion and it's kill or be killed, and then you persecute that person or you persecute that child for killing the lion because it's a heinous act to kill something, rather than persecuting the society that sets up a system that makes this kind of behavior okay, or persecuting the being that placed that person within the arena to begin with. If that person comes out alive on the other end and defeats the lion, we should be celebrating the fact that they came out alive on the other end. And yet we don't do this with the women that have been masculinized by their trauma. The fact that you can even energetically change genders this way, and the same thing when men have to soften up when they're around very like tyrant-oriented mothers and things like that. The fact that we can energetically change sex to preserve ourselves and preserve our species should be something that we consider an evolutionary accomplishment, but it becomes an issue once you're no longer in that situation. It's adaptation and then maladaptation, right? So what we consider coping mechanisms to be are nothing but the perfect action for a perfect scenario. But it becomes a coping mechanism when you're no longer in that scenario and you try to take that action to another scenario where it doesn't fit. Ideally, this is what is going on with masculinized women. In that moment, in that lifestyle, or in that trauma that you were living in, that was the perfect reaction. That was the perfect way to function to get you through it. But sometimes I don't think that we understand we've been stained by this behavior, and now we're taking it to other areas of our lives where they don't necessarily belong anymore. Or even if you're still in a cycle where you are responsible for providing for yourself, there are ways that you can soften up and create a little bit less stress in your life. But the first step is to understand that you fought honorably and you fought beautifully, but understand that it's no longer the time and place to fight that heavy for things in your life. When I wrote this, I also talked about the fact that we do this all the time in funerals. It's a eulogy to a person or saying a kind word. When we let somebody go and we honor somebody's memory when they're passing and moving on to the next phase, we always find this duty at funerals to make sure that we speak positively of the being that's passing. And when we're improving these sides of ourselves, we're going through a metaphorical death in cycles all the time, day in and day out. And yet we don't consider it to be as pivotal and important to make sure that we say a kind word about the traits and the parts of our being that are passing as we move forward and evolve into the next stage of our life. So I want to make sure that women really understand that coping mechanisms are nothing more than the perfect reaction for you to act through in a particular traumatic situation, and that it's not maladaptive in that situation, and it's not something to be persecuted within the context of that situation that you went through. The reason that people hold negativity towards it is because you're now moving forward through time towards something else, and you're allowed to soften, but it should be something that, if you find it fit for yourself, that you naturally want to move towards to create more inner peace, and not something that comes out of persecution, like you're a nuisance in the dating market without... There's just such a lack of understanding and sympathy for these women, I think. And I think that there should be more appreciation, especially from men, when you realize that maybe not you specifically, but this group of women has picked up the slack for the men who have failed them, and for the men that have failed you, or fathers that have failed you, right? So collectively, these women took over the responsibility of every man that has ever abandoned a male or a female. And she has assumed that role, assumed that energy to make sure that we continue to evolve. And I think there's something very poetic about that, and something that goes completely unnoticed all the time about these tough women. And that last point, you're still responsible for your own healing, and honoring this part of yourself doesn't excuse you from that process, or give you a free pass to stay in this energy if it's causing a detriment to you or causing a detriment to people around you. But I think we should just be more proud of ourselves as that phase of our life is passing.